Have you ever wondered what a highly sensitive person is and if you are, in fact, a highly sensitive person yourself? Well, if that sounds like you, in this video, I'm going to cover 7 major signs that you could be a highly sensitive person based on the work of a renowned psychologist. And at the end of this video, we'll talk about how this actually has a hidden link to specific attachment styles and which attachment styles are most likely to be a highly sensitive person. So, first and foremost, the term highly sensitive person was actually coined by psychologist Elaine Aron back in the 1990s. And she essentially did a whole bunch of different research about a subset of the population who experienced heightened sensitivity, heightened emotions, and also a lot of responsiveness to their environment and environmental stimulus or stimuli. And she basically created the first book about the highly sensitive person and discussed the topic of how to thrive when the world overwhelms you. Now, there are 7 core qualities that she discusses in this book of the highly sensitive person. And the very first one is emotional depth and intensity. In other words, highly sensitive people tend to feel their emotions very deeply and very strongly. And we could ask ourselves the question, is this because of nature or is this because of nurture? And that's something we're really going to discuss more deeply towards the end. And so, this highly sensitive individual may experience both positive and negative emotions a little bit more intensely. And they may find that they can really tap into their number 2 characteristic or quality is empathy and compassion. In other words, the more intensely I experience my emotions, the more breadth of understanding I'm probably likely to have in terms of how somebody else might be experiencing their emotions, what they might be feeling. So, another huge characteristic of the highly sensitive person is that they tend to be big feelers in terms of their own emotions, but having compassion and empathy for others as well. Now, this can also lead to things like emotional burnout or this emotional overwhelm if we're constantly feeling into other people's experiences. And we have to ask ourselves the same question, where does this come from? Why is this happening? And again, we'll cover a lot of these really interesting sort of ideas towards the end of the video. But number 3, a huge component of highly sensitive people is that they tend to have a lot of overwhelm in terms of stimuli. They may be overwhelmed by loud noises. They may be overwhelmed by bright colors, scents. A lot of different input in their environment can cause them to just feel overstimulated and eventually exhausted. Characteristic number 4, and by the way, as I go through these 7 characteristics, you can keep track of like which ones really stand out for you, and which ones you really see yourself as. Characteristic number 4 is deep processing and reflection. So highly sensitive people tend to, it's sometimes referred to as depth of processing. They tend to really dive deep into, how they feel and the sort of introspective parts of themselves. So, really reflecting on what's triggering them, what's upsetting them, what they're feeling, why they're feeling this way. All of these characteristics, this depth of processing and this ability to deeply introspect and reflect actually have a lot to do with the highly sensitive person. Our next one is there can be this creative element of the highly sensitive person. Now, I think when we think of creativity, we tend to think of creativity through the lens of like being a painter or a musician, but really creativity also comes in the space of problem solving, coming up with ideas, creating content. Like there can be so many different components to creativity, and it can also be sensitivity to other people's creations, this deep appreciation for creativity as a whole, or a greater likelihood to potentially be a little bit more right brained in different experiences, or at least have this really strong, like right brained creative element. However, this brings us to our next piece, which is there can also be this ability to deeply analyze things. So we'll find oftentimes that highly sensitive people are both very strongly emotional, but also very analytical. And I think it's because, the highly sensitive person, as they're moving through a lot of their own experiences, they actually really need to unpack a lot of these things. So they'll tend to move through a lot of their emotions, feel overwhelmed by their emotions, and then try to kind of equilibrate or compensate for this strong emotionality by really hyper analyzing things. But this can also lead to things like rumination. So that can be a really huge piece there. And then what we'll also see is highly sensitive people tend to just have heightened sensory perception as a whole. So, we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but we will see even to like loud environments. They sometimes can feel overwhelmed by lots of people. Just anything where there's this constant and incessant stimulus, it can cause a highly sensitive person to feel very overwhelmed and drained. So now, how do we plug this in and not just understand if this is you or this sounds like you, but what is the relationship here to attachment and attachment trauma? Well, what I find the vast majority of the time is that highly sensitive people are not often dismissive avoidant attachment styles, nor are they often securely attached styles. And it doesn't mean that these styles are not sensitive or that they aren't able to feel their emotions. Of course, we know dismissive avoidant attachment styles tend to kind of repress their emotions and try to disconnect from themselves as a coping mechanism. And we know securely attached individuals tend to have a lot of stability and consistency in terms of their emotional state and how they feel. And it also doesn't mean, of course, that securely attached people and dismissive avoidance don't have the ability to deeply process or be analytical. They may have certain of the qualities from the seven that we mentioned, but the big differentiator is that anxious, preoccupied, and fearful avoidant attachment styles tend to really feel their emotions. They tend to have this depth of processing around their emotions and a lot of empathy and concern for the emotions of other people. And so there can be this sensitivity overall to a lot of these different things. But we'll also see that they tend to have all of the other characteristics the vast majority of the time. Of course, just like with anything else, there are exceptions, but we'll see a lot of that emotional depth, that intensity, that compassion, the empathy, the oversensitivity to stimuli, the deep processing, being very analytical, and sensitivity to art and creativity, as well as that heightened sensory perception. So we'll see a lot of these different dynamics for APs and FAs alike. And I personally believe that just like with most things, we have a genetic predisposition towards different dynamics, right? Like we can be genetically predisposed to certain things, but it's not nature or nurture. It's really nature and nurture together. And so when you couple a certain genetic predisposition, and you couple that with having more intense emotional experiences at a young age or throughout childhood, and then having a conditioned environment where there may be traces of codependency and enmeshment, which also cause you to hyper attune to other people and what they might be feeling, as well as to feel so strongly about your own emotions and your own environment and the way that that environment impacts you. This is where we are going to see the greatest patterning trending towards highly sensitive people as fearful avoidant attachment styles, anxious preoccupied attachment styles, with the vast majority of those seven major characteristics. So if you weren't familiar, that's a little bit about what the highly sensitive person is. I think that a huge component, like I would definitely consider myself a highly sensitive person. And of course, as most of you know, I was a fearful avoidant attachment style. But the interesting thing is, you may have these sort of characteristics where you can feel a lot for other people, feel a lot for yourself, have a lot of that empathy and compassion and sort of depth of processing components. But also, when you recondition a lot of your core wounds and you learn to have healthy boundaries, this is where we're not as likely to feel burned out by our own sensitivity. We're not as likely to feel burdened by our own sensitivity because that can be difficult at times. We're not as likely to find ourselves over giving to the point of burning ourselves out and sacrificing instead of compromising, right? There's some big differences in here. So if you are a highly sensitive person and you do resonate with this, some really important pointers I have for you is please take the time to learn healthy boundaries. And please take the time to make sure any core wounds, any painful imprints you have from past experiences or trauma, you are also taking the opportunity to really recondition, to challenge, to question, to work through, especially if there are ideas about being bad if you're not caretaking for everybody all the time, or having a lot of, fears of seeing other people in pain or abandoning people or anything like that. We want to show up as best we can, but we have to learn to take ourselves into consideration equally to others. And that is a huge component of not just managing being a highly sensitive person, but also a step towards becoming more and more securely attached and building those thriving relationships long term. So I hope to shed some light on this topic for you. If you want to do a deep dive into belief reprogramming, please check out our emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course for free for 7 days. You can use the link below. If you cancel before day 7, you'll never get charged anything. So you can really dive in there. You can get to work. It's a very in-depth course that will teach you all about your subconscious mind, how it works, how to recondition your subconscious subconscious mind. And we also have a boundaries course you can check out for free using the same link down below if you see that boundaries are something that you may really need to work on. And it can really help you as well remove fears of not being codependent and not caretaking for everybody all the time, so that you can have healthy harmony and balance and equilibrium between the capacity to show up for other people and be there, but also the capacity to self-care and make those as equal as possible. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know which of the 7 major characteristics you related to as a highly sensitive person. And also let me know if you want to see more content about this or any questions that you have about this down below. And if you're enjoying this channel, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the notification bell so you don't miss any of the daily content I put out for you. And I can't wait to see you in future videos. Thanks for watching.